All right. Good afternoon. Glad you still have some energy left. This morning, the Secretary General spoke at a meeting of the Global Counter-Terrorism Compact focusing on Africa. He said that in just a few years, Africa has become a global epicenter of terrorism across the continent. He added, Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and their affiliates are exploiting local conflict dynamics and fragilities in advance of their agendas, while shredding the social fabric of entire societies and countries with violence, mistrust, and fear. Those remarks were shared with you. Turning to Gaza, because I know you've all wanted a bit of an update, we're told that a team was sent to assess the situation at the UNRWA Training Centre in Khan Younis that was struck earlier today. The site was sheltering tens of thousands of displaced people. We should have more information for you once the colleagues on the grounds have reported back. Our Humanitarian Coordinator at interim, Jamie McGoldrick, told you this morning that initial reports indicate that 9 people were killed and some 75 more were injured. Still on Khan Younis, our humanitarian affairs colleagues report that Israeli military issued new evacuation orders yesterday, including to areas where Al-Amal and Nasser hospitals are located. The affected areas cover some 4 square kilometers, and there are about 90,000 men, women, and children in the area, in addition to an estimated 425,000 people who are already internally displaced. Hostilities are continuing in the vicinity of Al-Nasser Hospital. An international emergency medical team deployed at the hospital tells us that no one can enter or exit the facility due to the ongoing bombardments. Health staff are also reported to be digging graves on hospital grounds due to a large number of fatalities anticipated and the need to manage the burials. Meanwhile, so far in January, World Food Program says it has reached 930,000 affected people with food assistance across Gaza. In addition, WFP distributed canned meats, biscuits, wheat flours to more than 13,000 people in the northern governments of Gaza. The Security Council meeting on the Middle East that took place yesterday and suspended at 8 p.m. will resume at 3 p.m. today. You will have seen that the Secretary General opened the meeting yesterday. He once again demanded the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, called for a rapid, safe, unhindered, expanded, and sustained humanitarian access throughout Gaza, and renewed his appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. And I think I'd been asked earlier this week about Hans Grunberg and his work on Yemen. Our special envoy this week had discussions in Riyadh with the Yemeni Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmed bin Mubarak. They, of course, discussed the current challenges and the way to protect the recent progress on a nationwide ceasefire, measures to improve the lives of people living in Yemen, and the resumption of an inclusive political process under UN auspices. He also met with Saudi and Emirati ambassadors to Yemen and the ambassadors to Yemen of Security Council 5 permanent members. During those meetings, he stressed the need to maintain a conducive environment for continued dialogue in Yemen and to sustain concerted regional and international support for Yemen. I'd also been asked, I think, by Miriam, who's not here, but of interest to you, on Afghanistan. The Secretary General will convene a follow-up meeting with member states and regional organizations, special envoys on Afghanistan. That meeting will take place in Doha on the 18th and 19th of February. The objective of the meeting is to discuss how to approach increasing international engagement in a more coherent, coordinated, and structured manner, including through consideration of the recommendations of the independent assessment on Afghanistan. The details on format and other arrangements are still being worked on. And turning to Ukraine, our colleagues in the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that attacks have continued in the country today, while since yesterday morning, humanitarian organizations have been providing emergency assistance to civilians affected by the latest attacks in Kharkiv and Dnipro regions. This support includes first aid, psychosocial, and shelter materials for emergency repairs. Our humanitarian colleagues also tell us that attacks on civilians' homes and infrastructures have significantly increased in the last 2 months, Last year, there were 227 incidents impacting hospitals across the country. And just to give you some context, the World Health Organization reports that out of 35 attacks on hospitals worldwide since the start of the year, 14 were in Ukraine. And just to say to you that earlier today, our peacekeeping colleagues in the Central African Republic held a ceremony to pay tribute to Emmanuel Steve Atebele, who you will recall is the peacekeeper who was tragically killed by an explosive device on January 15th. 5 other peacekeepers were wounded on that day, and they are now in stable condition. Relatedly, the mission also reports that specialized units of its forces, in coordination with the UN Mine Action Service, continue to minimize the risk linked to explosive devices. They regularly carry out clearances and destruction of unexploded ordnances operations, as well as conduct awareness campaigns for the benefit of the local population. Also, elsewhere in the country, the peacekeepers established a temporary operational base in Amdafok in Vakaga Prefecture, close to the border with Sudan. This base will strengthen our efforts to secure the area and help prevent potential violence and tension ahead of the seasonal movement of livestock known as transhumans. Today is the International Day of Education. Learn it. It's a reminder that education is a human right, a public good, and a public responsibility. Also, without inclusive, equitable education, countries will not succeed in achieving gender equality and breaking the cycle of poverty. Programming guests tomorrow, we will have at the briefing the chief of UNCTAD's trade facilitation section, Jan Hoffman. He will be here to speak to you virtually about the impact of what the current tensions in the Red Sea are having on the global trade. And we also expect the Director General of the IAEA for PAM, Rafael Grossi, will speak to you at the stakeout at the Security Council following the Council briefing. On a roll, 2 new countries, 1 more quiz. This time we're not going to talk about food, we're going to talk about drink. You ready, Joe? First country's national drink is Kali, which is made from fermented bread with sour sweet taste and very low alcohol content. The second country's national drink is Blauburgunder, otherwise known as Pinot Noir. What countries are we thanking today? No. Yeah, but they would be Blauburgunder. It would be Pinot Noir. Anyway, we thank Liechtenstein and we thank Estonia. Both of them paid their budget dues in full and are on the honor roll. Joe.
Thank you. 2 questions on unrelated subjects. First of all, Foreign Minister Lavrov, at the outset of his remarks, said that Ukraine had downed a plane that he said was part of a prisoner exchange, and he asked for a emergency Security Council meeting this afternoon. So I'd like to know whether you have any information on that. And secondly, the UN's 2024 Interagency Coordination Platform for Refugees and Migrants from Venezuela, which actually extends beyond Venezuela to a number of Latin American countries, was just recently released, and I'm wondering whether there are any restrictions on the debit cards that apparently are being given to migrants under this program. Restrictions on how these debit cards are being used, and
well,
are they being given?
I think we need to check with our colleagues at UNHCR and IOM, who usually handle these electronic cash transfers.
Okay, I mean, the question is whether, as it's been alleged, that these debit cards are mostly being given to immigrants in transit to the United States. So, in fact,
well, let me check. I mean, there is throughout the world, different places, IOM and UNHCR do electronic cash transfers to help people on the move. But on the details, we'll check with them. On your first question, we've seen the reports of the downed plane. We have no information beyond what's in the press. We, of course, very much regret the loss of life of all who were on board, but we have absolutely no further information. Tony.
Shukran, Steph. Could you please confirm the recent report stating that Yemen's Houthi authorities have ordered U.S. and British staff of the United Nations and Sana'a-based humanitarian organizations to leave the country within a month?
Yes, we have in fact received communications from the de facto authorities requiring, giving us 1 month for all U.S. and U.K. Nationals to leave the area under the control of the de facto authorities. What needs to be said is that any request or requirement for UN staff to leave based solely on the nationality of that staff is inconsistent with the legal framework applicable to the UN. It also, of course, impedes our ability to deliver on the mandate to support all of the people in Yemen. And we call on all the authorities in Yemen to ensure that our staff can continue to perform their functions on behalf of the UN. And I would remind you that UN staff all serve impartially and serve the flag of the UN and none other.
Just to follow up, the UN's acting humanitarian coordinator in Yemen, Peter Hawkins, is British himself. What would be his fate?
Well, what I'm saying to you is that we call on the authorities to ensure that all of our staff can continue to do their work. Ibtisam.
Just to follow up on that, so how many international staff do you have in Yemen, and how many of them are British and Americans? We are talking about humanitarian.
I mean, I can find out the number of international staff. We do not give breakdowns of our staff's own nationality. I mean, the point is that they're there to serve the UN. That information I don't have, but I can give you a rough number of how many international staff we have.
And the context we are talking about staff who are working for humanitarian operations, etc.
Yeah. Correct. Pam.
Thanks, Steph. The Security Council meeting appears to be in the process, according to the French presidency, for tomorrow after the Grossi IAEA briefing, rather than today, for the crash, regarding the crash of the plane.
Are you asking me or you're telling me?
No, I'm saying that's what it is.
Okay, you know
so
more than I
my
do.
question is there anything the Secretariat would do with regard to ICAO, the civil aviation, to initiate any kind of investigation? And would there be a briefing
if we are asked to provide a briefer, we will, as we always do. As for the International Civil Aviation Organization, it would be up to the member states of the ICAO and the Secretary of the ICAO to invoke itself or not in this, but that's not under. But that's not
UN
right. But that's not
right.
under the purview of the Secretary General.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Bashir, and then Stefano. Okay, Stefano.
Oh, thank you, Stéphane. When the Foreign Minister Lavrov, when he was asked about the situation in Red Sea, he said that the attacks that the Americans and the UK doing against Yemen is against the Charter of the United Nations and so on. And then in the here in the statement of the foreign minister about the meeting that he had with the secretary, just ahead with the Guterres, they write, Sergei Lavrov also emphasized that it's imperative for all members of the UN Secretariat to strictly observe the principle of impartiality and equidistance in full compliance with the UN Charter. Question, does the Secretary General think that what's happening in the Red Sea at the moment, the attacks against Yemen, are against the UN Charter?
What the Secretary General wants to see is avoidance of any risk of further escalation to what is going on in the Red Sea. It is already having a negative impact on global trade, on our humanitarian. It could have also a negative impact on our humanitarian operations. There's great risk there's also the risk of losing ground of what we've gained, what we've already gained in Yemen. And what he wants to see is the full implementation of Resolution 2722. Margaret, you've thought of a question.
Yesterday, SG had a lot of bilats. Do we have any readouts from the Iranian Foreign Minister meeting or Lavrov's meeting?
On the meeting with Mr. Lavrov, a lot of the focus was on the situation in the Middle East, as well as host country issues, as the Russian mission put out in its readout. On the meeting with the Iranian Foreign Minister, it was really focused on the risk of escalation, of regional escalation, and reiterating the Secretary General's call to avoid any further escalation. Yes, sir. And
thank you for the briefing. My name is Yu from Kyoto News. So I have a follow-up question about the UN compound housing in Gaza, in Khan Younis. So do you have more details? So who is the casualty? And then does the Secretary General have a comment?
Well, in terms of our comment, this is yet just another case of civilians being in the front lines of this conflict, the disregard for the protection of civilians. I can tell you that the compound in Khan Younis is quite a large compound, with a lot of people seeking shelter. There are about 30,000 people in the shelter. It's large. It has different building. It's about 5 times over. It's at more than 5 times its capacity. The building that was hit was housed about 800 people. We don't know right now if the people that were killed or wounded were staff or civilians seeking protection. And I can tell you that the coordinates of the building, as with every other UN facility, and this is a large one, was shared with the Israeli authorities. Yes, Mr. Yonhap.
Thank you. I'm Jihan from Yonhap News. I'd like to ask about personnel thing on data security situations. This morning, the Asia Society, the US-based NGO, announced the appointment of former South Korean Foreign Minister Kang as its new president. And I know that Dr. Kang has also held senior positions at the UN before. So do you have any comment on this?
Sure. We very much welcome the decision by the Asia Society to name Ms. Kang as its new leader. As you rightly pointed out, Ms. Kang was a long-time staff member holding senior positions in the Secretariat. She has a wonderful and great background, not only from her time at the UN, her time as foreign minister. We consider her a friend and a good friend of the United Nations, and we'll be happy to welcome her back to New York. Thank you. Okay, on that note, I will leave you in Monica's hands, and I will see you tomorrow.